Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, respected guests. Welcome to this fantastic evening. I thank you all for being here on behalf of Sujata and her family. We're here for the launch of Sujata Kelkar Shetty's debut book, 99 Not Out, Your Guide to a Long and Healthy Life. Who doesn't want that, huh? As many of you who know Sujata personally might already be aware, Sujata herself leads an extremely mindful and healthy life. So in that sense, she embodies the very principles she has put together in her wonderful new book. But what some of you may not know is that she earned her stripes in the world of wellness through hard work and tremendous discipline. Dr. Sujata Kelkar Shetty is a US-trained biological scientist with publications in peer-reviewed journals. She did her postdoctoral training from the National Institute of Health, and it was here that she worked on the pathways of stress-related immunosuppression. In the last decade, Sujata has been focused on researching and writing on wellness, including a column in The Mint. She is also a certified life coach and conducts wellness workshops based on her expertise in wellness and her experience in coaching. She has a bachelor's degree in genetics and a PhD in toxicology from the University of Kentucky, Lexington. Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to welcome on stage my very dear friend, Sujata Kelkar Shetty.
Thank you, sir. So, writer died and had the option of going to heaven or hell. She decided she'd check out both places first. So she went down to the throes of hell. And there she found row upon row of writers chained to their desks in a steaming sweatshop, being whipped with thorny lashes. She said, I've seen enough. I want to see heaven now. So she walked up the stairway to heaven. And there too she saw row upon row of writers chained to their desks in a steaming sweatshop, being whipped with thorny lashes. She said, wait a minute, this is no different from hell. A voice said quietly in the background, but yes, there is a difference. In heaven, your work gets published. So ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and family, I am, in heaven, particularly tonight, to have all of you in front of me here, with so much love and good cheer. I feel genuinely blessed and I'm deeply grateful. Thank you all for braving Bombay traffic, Bombay weather, and sharing this evening with us. I hope you take something back from the conversation we're going to have to make your life 99 not out. I want to thank my parents, without whom I wouldn't be here. My dear family back in Bangalore, my husband Nitesh, my children Akash and Arun for their loving support. My dear friends for their many kindnesses. My agent Jaypriya Vasudevan, without whom none of this would have been possible. Falguni Gokhale, who has done the illustrations for this book and charged me not a rupee for it. Her only remark was when we talked about it in typical Indian style about paying, not paying, paying, not paying, she said, pay it forward. I intend to do that. I have to thank these three amazing women who have helped me with the social media piece. There is one person though, there's several people that I want to make sure I remember. There's one person who has written the foreword for this book, Dr. Farooq Udwadia. And in this audience, everyone knows who he is. He is the doyen of Beach Candy Hospital. He's 88 years old. He starts his rounds every morning in the ICU, walks his way down. Patients dream to be healed by him. Residents pray that they might work with him. He is a master diagnostician, a healer, and a teacher. And he, ladies and gentlemen, chose to take the time to read this book and give it his vote of confidence in the most beautiful way. I'm forever indebted. I'm also deeply, deeply indebted to the people who are movers and shakers of this country and took the time to read this book before it was published and give it their vote of confidence that has gone in as words of praise at the back of the book and in the first 2 pages of the book. Dr. Dhruv Shah, who's a doctor based in Bombay, Mahesh Bhupati, the tennis player, Rahul Dravid, Dr. Devi Shetty, Dr. Isaac Mathai, Dr. Ramesh Masharkar, the famous scientist, Kiran Mazumdar Shaw, Nandan Nilikani, and Ravina Tandon. And now a little bit about the book, the reason we're all here this evening. Why should you read it? I've been writing on health and wellness for the last 10 years, and I've about 100 or so columns in the Mint from the last couple of years. And my reading and writing and research has led me to the firm conclusion that basically minimizing, the art or the secret of longevity is really about looking after our mind, body and spirit, because that helps us prevent illness and disease. So the book shares 29 wellness principles, as I call them, across the mind, body and spirit, and shares tips on how you can engage with each principle to lead the happiest and the healthiest version of your lives, and by virtue of leading the happiest and healthiest versions, the longest one. Because the length of life isn't just measured in years, right? It's not about how many years you add to your life. It's also about adding it's also about adding life to your years. So I think with that, I'm going to let the MC introduce the 2 amazing people that I'm going to be sharing the stage with this evening. The wonderful and talented lady who's going to be emceeing this discussion, and the genius of Bollywood who is going to be launching the book. So I'll let Suchi make the introductions.
I'm going to use my glasses now, 49 not out, I sometimes am in denial. Thank you very much, Sujata. I'm very glad that I've already picked up my copy as soon as it was out on Amazon. I'd now like to call on stage a very special lady who will be moderating the book discussion later this evening, well, further down the evening. She is the co-founder of the Arts Quotient, a leadership firm that harnesses methodology from the performing arts to enable business leaders to become more creative, collaborative and agile. A business strategy specialist with a passion for the arts, her background includes a master's in politics, philosophy and economics from Oxford University, an MBA from Harvard Business School, and a former position as a business consultant with McKinsey. On her journey towards holistic health, this lady and Sujata's paths intersected. Their many subsequent interactions, experiences and ideas have culminated in this conversation which we're about to have today. Please put your hands together for Ms. Swati Apte. And now we are very, very lucky to have with us a gentleman who frankly needs no introduction. A man who has captured the imagination of several generations of music lovers with the beauty of his words, indeed, his poetry. A social and political activist, poet, lyricist and screenwriter, this stalwart of Hindi cinema has been awarded the Padma Shri, Padma Bhushan, the Sahitya Academy Award, as well as 5 National Film Awards. We've all loved the music to his lyrics and quoted a dialogue or 2 from his films. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage the inimitable Mr. Javed Akhtar. Before we go further, Javed sir, can I ask you to launch the book, please, and then say a few words. So any thoughts? Would you like to say a few words before we start? Okay, let's get into the...
I'll do that. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me to this elegant and beautiful program and to release such a wonderful book, which I have yet to read. I have noticed that wherever I go, I'm introduced by he needs no introduction. But nobody ever takes a chance. And that introduced me. Here we have so many doctors. When I entered, Vijayji introduced me to at least 15 doctors. So perhaps I'm the only patient here. Human brain is really a unique part of our body. It starts working before we are born. And it stops working a little after when we are medically, clinically dead. The only time it stops is when you have to talk about a book that you have not read. So you can understand my condition, but I'll try my best to say something afterwards.
So I'll give the stage now to Swati, Sujata and Javed.
Thank you, Sujata. Welcome everyone. And at the onset, Sujata, I want to tell you how absolutely delighted, how special it is to be here. Because perhaps I'm one of those lucky people who's had the privilege of seeing you in your journey of grappling with this subject for the last 20 years. You know, whether it's through your degree in toxicology, your PhD, and PhDs can be very, very taxing, your time at NIH. And I remember in our 20s, you talking about people's attitudes to pain and aging, when really we were doing more mundane things in our 20s, the rest of us. So it's really special to be here and to see this culmination of the journey and to be able to celebrate the book with you. So congratulations. Thank you, Sahab. Welcome again. It's wonderful to have you here on this occasion. So perhaps a good place to begin this conversation is to start where your book begins. You know, you referenced Dr. Upadhyay's foreword, and one of the things he does in the foreword is calls your book. He says that your book is about the art of longevity, right? And he's saying that you take a very holistic view to good health. And for most of us, good health is really quite simply not being sick, right? It's just the absence of disease. But your book has a different take on it. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So Swati, good health isn't just the absence of disease, right? It's the presence of something, and it's the presence of a strong mind, body and spirit. And this isn't my definition, ये मेरे दिमाग के ऊपर नहीं है. This is the WHO's definition. So the WHO says that good health is a presence of strong mental, physical and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease and infirmity. Now when we take this definition as a goal, and we strive towards it, the idea isn't to make it seem like it's something unattainable. The idea is to use it so that we incorporate certain behavioral practices into our life, that we experience this definition more often than not, and therefore lead a happier and healthier life and a longer one as a consequence. Now, the famous American choreographer, whose name I'm forgetting, I'm sure I'll remember soon enough. He lived about 87 years old. He lived to be about 87, and he worked for, I think, 60 of those years. Fred Astaire, there we go. Fred Astaire said that, getting older is like anything else. To make a success of it, you've got to start young. And again, before we get caught up with what young means, I'm going to, be rescued by the WHO again, because they say that 18 to 65 is youth, 66 to 79 is middle age, 80 to 99 is the elderly, and the people who live over 100 are the well-aged elderly. So yeah.
So really a long life. But in this thinking of longevity, you actually started that very young. We're still young women, but you started thinking about it in your 20s, as I just said. What sparked that interest, and where did that work begin for you?
So having Swati hold this conversation with me, this is the fourth time I'm doing this, is really special because she really has known me for a long, long time. We're not going to talk about how long. And graduate school was about studying the behavior of immune cells during an HIV infection. So, we were young, idealistic graduate students, and we wanted to do what mattered, what could make a difference in the world. And HIV was a big thing to conquer. It was a mountain to conquer in immunology. So me and my roommate, we were both involved in the same kind of research. And one evening when she came back, both of us came back from a really long day in the lab, and we had ordered pizza, as all graduate students do. And she said to me, Sujata, I think we're doing this the wrong way. And I said, what do you mean, Hema? Name's Hema Gursani. What do you mean? And she said, I don't think the answer to finding healing solutions lies in molecular research. And we were really looking at molecules interacting within cells. So we were really going down to the minutiae. And that's still how drugs are found all over the world. And that stuck with me, right? And then a dear, dear friend got chronic fatigue syndrome. I don't know how much you know about chronic fatigue syndrome, but it's an illness that is associated with chronic fatigue, as the name suggests, and debilitating pain. And this was a very young person. And the doctors were saying it was because of stress. So here was an illness that was affecting the body, but had the mind play such a major role. And that struck me as really important, because then you'd think if stress plays a role in a disease like this, stress must play a role in a lot of other diseases. So I went off to do my postdoctoral work with Dr. Chroussos, who's a Greek endocrinologist and one of the most important researchers in stress in the world. And this was at the NIH. And we discovered, sure enough, that stress impacts the immune system, both acute stress and chronic stress. So even short-term stress and long-term stress will diminish your body's ability to fight infection and disease. Moved back to India shortly thereafter, met my wonderful husband Nitesh, got married, had our babies right away, so doing research was no longer an option. I even needled Akhtar Saab once about possibly singing for a living, and he said, you can't do that sitting in Bangalore. So that was sort of out, but I started writing on health. So I've been writing on health for the last 12 years. And while I was writing and sitting in India, you can't help but notice that our country has the unfortunate distinction of having a high infectious disease burden and a high lifestyle disease burden. So we have diseases like diabetes and depression at the highest level, and we've got infectious diseases. 20% of the global burden of disease, but only 10% of the world's resources. Only 1% of our GDP, as my father will hopefully agree with me on this, is spent on public health infrastructure. So what we really need to really think about is prevention. We have no choice in the matter, right? From both a public health and a private health perspective. Because how many of us really want to be sick anyway? Nobody really wants to be sick. And our health span is diminishing as well. Indians typically fall sick of, say, heart disease, for example, at the age of 55. In America, it's 65. So we're falling sick sooner. We're falling sick with many more illnesses. So prevention is the way to go, and strengthening our mind, body, and spirit is the way to do it.
So it's interesting, because you're right, there is a high incidence of disease in this country. But if you really think since independence, we've also virtually doubled lifespans, right? So for a poor country, that's a remarkable achievement. And it's come from of course we have some way to go, but it's come from a variety of things, right? It's come from better access to medicines, it's come from better diet and nutrition, it's just come from health services being available to more people. As you discuss the principles in the book, how much of this in India, this longevity that we have achieved in the last 72 years, do you attribute to those principles? And how much of it has been happy aging?
Yeah, so in the Bavaria, Thomas Hobbes wrote that the life of man is poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And that was the case of our countrymen when our country got independence. Can you guess what the life expectancy was at independence? Yeah, 31 years. So our average lifespan was 31 years at independence. And now it's 68.5 years. Before we get terribly excited, in Japan it's 86 years. And before we get excited about the fact that it's doubled, most of this doubling is because of a drop in the number of children dying at childbirth and within the first year of age, because of improved access to healthcare for pregnant women, and their babies thereafter. But really, again, what we're really fighting for is our health span, right? Because if on an average, our health span is 53 years right now, so on an average, the Indian citizen falls sick of a lifestyle disease by the age of 53, and a lifestyle disease unfortunately has brothers and sisters. So you don't just get one, you get a few. And you're spending the next 15 years with a couple of lifestyle illnesses. Can you imagine the stress on the household, the physical, emotional, mental, financial resources that get burdened because of it? So it's really not an option.
Absolutely. So at a national level, it's a concern. Coming back to the book, Sujata, it's called 99 Not Out. And the batting reference clearly comes from your son Akash's junoon for cricket. But why 99? Why not 100? I mean, 99 just sort of says the goal is visible, but not yet.
That's true. So the original title was 100 Not Out. And the editor was thrilled with it, and I just went with whatever the editor said, because I'm horrible with naming things anyway. And then January of this year, we found out that there was another book called 100 Not Out that had just been published, written by this Australian man. And
what is the book about?
So the subtitle tells you everything. So the book is called 100 Not Out, My Journey as a 24-year-old Virgin Who Slept with 100 or More Women by the time I reached 27. There was no way I was going to share a title with a book with a subject.
But as a matter of fact, 99 Not Out is a better title, because 100 gives a kind of sense of completion. It has no mobility, no movement. It's over, it's finished, it's complete. And we don't believe in that. Even in weddings, we don't give 100 rupees or 1 lakh rupees, 1 lakh 1, 101. So there is a sense of continuity. 99 makes me curious whether this person completed the century or not. How do we complete the century? So there is expectation. There is some aspiration hidden in 99, which is not in 100.
Thank you, Javed Sahib. In fact, my son came up with the title, and because he's a cricketer, and we immediately resonated with it for precisely that reason. So yes.
And there's an Australian out there who has a very rich life.
So shall I say, he was one up that was Australian.
Sujata, in your writing, I mean both in your articles and of course now in the book, because I've had the privilege to read it in advance, one of the things that really strikes me is the rigor of your research. Right? There's a lot of primary research, lots of conversations with experts. There's also the kind of studies that you reference. There's clearly a lot of secondary research as well. Maybe you can explain a little bit about where that approach to writing comes from. Is it your background in the sciences? Where does that come from?
Yeah, this is one of Swati's questions, to make sure that I talk about my background as a scientist. And I think they mix it in as cereal when they're in graduate school. The training is very rigorous. It requires that you read a lot before you make up your mind about anything. And I bring the same rigor to my book. I didn't have a choice. But also because I really want to convince people to lead happier and healthier lives. This is important to me. This is, my father has spent his lifetime in public service, and I think he mixed that into my cereal. So this is my way of, my little bit to give back. And I'm hopeful that the evidence will propel people to make the changes they need to live happier and healthier lives.
Absolutely, I think it's, and when you read the book, you will see there's really a lot of depth of research that's gone into putting that together. And every principle that is discussed, it's always backed with references, with work that others have done before. And speaking of research, Sujata, you've clearly talked to a lot of experts around the world from different countries, whether it's medical practitioners, whether it's psychologists, whether it's practitioners of the principles you discuss. But a lot of the data is US-centric. And I'm curious to hear, because longevity is not sufficiently studied by scientists in India.
Yeah, so it's true. So the research that I quote is from the United States mostly.
And that is because the money for research is there and the talent is there. The talent is certainly not American. So the lab that I worked at the NIH had 3 Greeks, 2 Italians, 1 Japanese, 1 Armenian, 1 Indian. Only the lab manager was American. Baki sab bahar ke the. And, but the money is certainly in America. So their annual budget at the NIH, which is the premier research institution, really sort of propels the research all over the world, is $30 billion US, which is equal to 1% of our GDP and what we spend on our public health infrastructure entirely. So they have the money and therefore the research happens there. But before we get too caught up in this difference, wondering about whether their research is really applicable to India, I'd like you all to know that from the 1970s to the 1990s, for 20 years, the NIH actively discouraged women from participating in clinical trials. So this is because of the thalidomide disaster. This is a mild sedative that women were allowed to take. They thought it was safe for women to take and pregnant women to get, and it resulted in thousands of babies being born deformed in Europe. And the American research institutions got really frightened. They said, "Chodo bhaiya, we won't allow women to come in, particularly women of childbearing age." The consequence, from 1997 to now, 80% of the drugs that have been taken out of the US market have been taken out because of the health risk they pose in women. So forget India versus the rest of the world. 50% of the world's population has not been tested on for the drugs that are currently in the market.
Yeah. Terrifying, right? To think of all the drugs that we take that don't have that kind of thinking and that kind of proof behind them. But let's get into the book itself. Yeah, and your book is really divided into 3 sections. You talk about principles as related to mind, as related to body, and as related to spirit, all of which contribute to a sense of a holistic and a good life. And if you were to sort of go deeper into the mind, you start with talking about how mindsets and mindfulness are really critical to that sense of well-being. There's a reference I remember to a study by Ellen Langer at Harvard, who says that you can certainly slow, if not reverse, aging. That was really intriguing to me. Is that really possible?
So yes, so she has, Ellen Langer was the first woman psychologist at Harvard, and she's this amazing star at Harvard, and she did this wonderful study called the counterclockwise study. And she took a group of 70-year-old men, and she put half of them, this was something that they all agreed to do, half of them were sent to a resort to enjoy themselves for 2 weeks. Who wouldn't want to be part of a study like that, right? And the only caveat was they had to reminisce about life from 20 years ago, from their 50s. The other half of the men had a far more challenging ask. So they were asked to cook and clean for themselves, look after themselves as if they were in their 50s. So they had to, and they were given memory cues in the form of videos, magazines, newspapers from 20 years ago. And they were only allowed to chit-chat amongst themselves as if they were in their 50s. So what their marriages were like, what their careers were like, what their children were like. And 2 weeks later, everybody was doing better. Physically, mentally, emotionally, why not, right? People on holiday are going to do better. But these guys who had been put in this counterclockwise situation were doing dramatically better. So their physical strength had improved, their eyesight had improved, their emotional well-being had improved, their mental acuity had improved. They were just far quicker. And it was a very dramatic result. It caused quite a ripple in the community of psychologists, and this study hasn't been repeated since, but it certainly gives us pause to consider.
I thought it was fascinating that experience of just thinking of yourself as able and not old changes what you are able to do. Javed Sahab, if I might ask you, how do you perceive this notion of mindsets in what people are able to do?
I suppose, it's not very complicated, it's very simple, honestly. You eat food, it goes to your stomach. If you eat bad food, it will spoil your stomach. If you smoke, nicotine will spoil your lungs. The way stomach consumes food and lungs consume smoke or air, what does this part of your personality consume? Thoughts. information. That is what it consumes. If the thoughts are good, if the information is pleasant, that body, that will be healthy. It's a part of the body and it will send good messages to the rest of the body. So it's very simple. We can reach this conclusion without going to Harvard.
So, no, but this makes intuitive sense to you.
I was listening with great attention because in all honesty I must accept that I'm totally ignorant about these things. This is not my topic. But there are certain things, and it is not only you but WHO has also used this term, mind, spirit and body. Now I really wonder that what is the difference between mind and spirit? Could you please educate me on that?
No, so really, when I was writing this book, and I had to come up with the way that I would structure it. The spirit is essentially, the spirit section of the book are basically the to-dos for the mind, to be perfectly honest. They are the things that we need to do to keep our mind enlivened.
Working is not a spirit, or doing anything is not a spirit. A spirit is integral part, supposed to be. You see, there was a time when man did not know whether earth is flat or round. So man had reached a conclusion that human beings are made of two components, body and spirit. Body decays, body withers away, but the spirit, if I may say, is non-biodegradable. Actually, it's a myth. There is nothing like a spirit. It's a pseudo-religious idea. There is body, there is mind. Mind that resides in the brain. Mind is intangible, brain is tangible. What is this spirit? If you cut all the nerves of a person that connect the rest of the body with the brain, you know what you say, brain dead. Is spirit present in a brain dead person? And if it is there, what is this poor spirit doing?
So I wasn't expecting to be, that I would get these questions from you directly. No, but I have to disagree with you. I have to disagree with you because I believe in the soul. And I believe in the soul being separate from the mind and the body. And I believe in incarnation. I believe in life, in subsequent lifetimes. I'm a student of the Gita. So I can have a long chat with you about this, and I'd be happy to, but I believe in the spirit. So I disagree with you.
But I think in the way that the book, perhaps, the way I read it in the book, is a lot of the mind section seemed to be about the attitudes, and the spirit section was about the practices that have helped you reinforce those attitudes or reinforce the sense of
Your
that.
mind does it. Your brain does it. The moment you are disconnected with your brain, you are disconnected with your mind, and nothing happens after that. The fact is this. Let's face the reality.
People go into coma, the brain is dead, but his breath is continuing.
So it is not totally dead. That means it is not totally dead, it is in coma, not in full stop. It is only coma. May I use this Gujarati pronunciation, but it is not a full stop. That is why it is not called death, it is called coma. Because the brain is not totally dead, the person is not totally dead.
So why do we use the term? Why do we use the term if there is no concept as spirit?
So may I actually request
Yeah, sure.
that we'll have time for questions? Okay, but
If we don't have the concept of spirit, for example, why do we call a person a spirited person and not a brainy person, spirited person? There are these various terms which come. So I think a brain would be an object which gives signals to your body to perform. But a spirit, like what Sujata was pointing out, would probably guide the brain to do a particular task in a particular fashion. So I may do that task in a fashion, or other person may do the task in another fashion. So I think the spirit could have a role, is what I feel. That's what I feel.
I'll let it pass. Because today it's her day. But believe me, you are wrong.
That is how we let it pass. No, but I think any book that even before people have read leads to such healthy debate, you're on the right track. But let's come back to again what we were saying in the book about attitudes, and that's how you think of mind. And Sujata takes a very scientific approach in this book, where she really, with each principle, she talks about what assumptions she makes and how she defines it. And I found that interesting. You talk about laughter, right? And you really talk about laughter and what it does to you at a molecular level, right? That it's changing your attitudes to pain, it's acting as an analgesic, and you see, you have laughter clubs all around this country, you have clown doctors in the US. Tell us a little bit about that.
So I interviewed Madan Kataria, who started these laughter clubs, and I'm sure you've seen one when you've gone on a morning walk. And he said he hasn't had a cold in the last 20 years. And of course, he's a sample size of one. But, and Groucho Marx, the famous clown, said, a clown is like an aspirin, only he works twice as fast. Research has shown us this. So there's a diminished, diminished inflammation, there's reduced stress. Comes as no surprise to all of us. We've all experienced the de-stressing effects of laughter. It also improves your cancer fighting ability. So just like people are telling us to eat brightly colored fruits and vegetables to fight cancer, laugh more, because your NK cells, which are your cancer fighting cells, cancer has this sort of cloak and dagger approach with your immune system, and NK cells can detect the cloak. So there's a lot. Yeah.
And Javed sir, for you, humor has been, so talking about laughter, for you, humor has been such a...
Humor is a very serious matter. The fact is, generally we believe that humor is for happiness. Nothing could be more wrong than that. Like shock absorbers in a car are not for smooth roads. They are for Bombay roads. So humor is also for these moments when life is not conducive.
Very well.
Life is not bearable, and it is only humor, that is spring, the softness of humor, which makes you tolerate it. You should be able, first of all, we human beings, by training or nature, I don't know, are very pompous. We take ourselves very seriously. Why I am in this universe? Why a mosquito is in this universe? Why a cockroach was in this universe, which you killed in the morning? 9. They have no purpose, but I have a purpose in this universe. God has created me. God has no time to create you because there is no God. But the fact is that we think like this. Life is uneven, life is totally... it's like a dice that you have thrown. Sometimes it goes right, sometimes it goes right. It's totally ad hoc. Things are ad hoc. But how do you tolerate this cynical attitude of circumstances towards you? That is the only medicine, the only remedy is humor. You should be able to see the funny side of life. Even in the worst moment, that's the only way you can survive.
Beautifully said.
And really, how do we tolerate it, right? How do we even tolerate medicine? And in your book, humor could be one way, but you talk about both placebo and nocebo, and how that can change how people respond to medicine, how the way that you can have a conversation with a doctor, whether there's humor involved, changes how patients can be treated. Say a little more about that. I thought that was quite fascinating.
Sure. So the placebo effect comes from Latin saying, I shall heal, and the nocebo is, I shall harm. And basically, it comes down to how your patient-doctor interactions are. So if your doctor has the potential to maim or heal.
What is the second word?
Nocebo.
I think the word Naseeb has come from
Well, there you go. Yes. So I think choose your doctors wisely. Choose doctors who make you feel good.
So it's not just their expertise, it's also your relationship and how you feel about that interaction that helps you get better. You also talk about habits and how building certain rituals and certain sort of very, not regimented, but certain rituals and habits helps a sense of wellness. And Javed Sahab, you have this huge body of work. I'm curious to hear, what are the kinds of habits that perhaps sort of anchor you as with your many commitments and your, and the work that you do on a daily basis? What is the role of habits in your life?
Well, quite a few people ask me, what is your source of inspiration? And I tell them honestly, my source of inspiration is terror. When the deadline comes near and I feel now it is impossible that I'll be able to meet it, only then my mind works. Even my spirit starts working. I am not a disciplined person at all, but thankfully I have this facility that I can write at any time, at any place, anywhere. And Shabana, in one of my books, Preface, has written that if his producers come to know that how quickly he writes a song, how much time he takes writing a song, they will stop paying him. So this is the facility, and all of you know Behram contractor, Busy Bee. So when I met him, I was a great fan of Behram contractor. So one day I met him somewhere at a party. I said, sir, I admire you, and I want to learn something from you. Every day you give a column. What kind of discipline you have? I wish I could have it. He said, discipline and me? Since last 30 years, I am trying to make a resolution that I should write the column in the evening. But ultimately, I have never done it. I go to my office, look at my typewriter, and I feel they will throw me out because today I am not able to write. And when the fear overtakes me, overwhelms me, only then I write it. So, you see, writers are lazy people. Actually, most of the people become writers because they can sit. So, I wish I had that discipline that every day from 10:30 to 12:30 I will write. I don't do that. When I'm writing, yes, when I have to meet my deadline, I can work for 30 hours, 40 hours at a go with a cup of coffee. But as long as I can stall it, I stall it. But somewhere the mind keeps working that when I'll write, what will I do? And so on and so forth. But that is also an excuse. Actually, I'm just wandering around.
So really mind and mindsets and that sense of terror is important in the way that you work. So mind is the first section of the book, and the second section of the book is body. And you talk about many things. You talk about exercise, you talk about sleep, you talk about protein intake. I want to talk to you about, given how important food is in our culture, and food is so topical at this moment, you don't talk about non-vegetarian or vegetarian. You talk about being a flexitarian, which is a whole new term for me. Where does that come from?
So it's about being vegetarian most of the time and eating fish or meat a couple of times a week. And we can't divorce our wellness from the wellness of the planet, right? We can't pretend that our wellness is different from the wellness of the planet. And enough research is telling us that for the wellness of our planet, we need to turn vegetarian. Now that's a tough pill for my own family to swallow because I live with 3 carnivores at home.
You have to ask what Nitesh thinks about this.
So I think the chapter was written for them. That we slowly move towards eating more plant-based diet with a little bit of meat. But for those of us who are vegetarian on a regular basis, please make sure that your vitamin B12, vitamin D, calcium and iron levels are checked regularly because those tend to go down with the Indian diet. It's not
necessarily sufficient.
So this is the way that many of us try to influence our children, it sounds like. When they don't listen to you, you write a book and you write a chapter and hope to be taken more seriously. Then coming to the spirit part of your book, and you've already said, you talk about significance and...
I'll keep my mouth shut.
Please don't.
You don't have to.
Please don't. Please don't. Please. And you've already brought...
You have said your piece, and this is not your book.
But you talk about a sense of purpose, which we're right, as human beings we seem to feel is vital, a sense of significance, and also a sense of coherence, right? And coherence, where does that idea come from?
So, researchers, as all researchers do, they spend a lot of time tinkering and trying to figure out answers to the questions they pose. And one of the questions they've been asking is, what brings meaning to people's lives? And they came up with 3 pillars, and please interject whenever you like, Javed Saab. But the 3 pillars that they came up with was purpose, significance, and coherence. Purpose is creating goals and meeting them, fairly straightforward. Significance is finding those moments in your day-to-day existence that add significance to your life. So whether it's that laughter you shared with your friend, the flower blooming in your garden, the sunset that you saw on your balcony, the beautiful bird that's singing outside your windowsill, catching those moments and savoring them. That's what researchers call significance. And the third one was coherence. So the coherence piece is about having a narrative of your life that makes sense to you. Like a life story of your life that makes sense to you. And they say that these 3 pillars are what give our life meaning. Akhtar sir? So far so good.
And the way that you have gone deeper into the pillars, Sujata, when I read the book, is of course with spirituality. And I know it's been a very deep practice for you. But what was interesting to me is you mentioned the Sri Sathya Sai hospitals, where just the faith that the doctors had and the patients had in the doctors seemed to have managed for the incidence of infection, right? I come from a family that believes that you must believe in God but lock your front door. So I was just, really, does it actually translate into empirical evidence around infection?
So I spoke to Dr. Farooq Udwadi about this extensively, and the director of the Sri Sathya Sai Hospital. And the Sri Sathya Sai Hospital is unique, right? Because you have people coming in there with faith built into the way they lead their lives, and the doctors too, because the doctors are largely volunteers. And Dr. Farooq Udwadi has had hundreds of patients and decades of experience, and he finds that people who have spiritual faith generally do better. So they tend to heal faster. They also are able to put that faith into their doctors. So he said the spiritual faith moves on to faith in the doctor, and that in turn helps them heal. So it's not just about having the faith in a higher power, but the faith in the person who's treating them.
Yeah. And then my favorite part of your book was this idea of how creativity and engaging with expression is so important to your own sense of wellness. And you've had a practice of music on your life throughout. Talk a little bit about that, because I know that in all the work you've done, you've always still remained anchored to your ears. What's that done for you?
Yeah, so I started my journey with Savita Devi in Delhi, and then there was a big break while I was studying for all those years in the States, and then I came back and I was working with Javed Akhtar in Delhi again. And then I moved on to learning how to sort of emote, so I learned how to sing, and I'm singing sort of Meera bhajans. So there's been a movement from classical to more folk and bhajans, or devotional music. And for me, music, when I sing, I feel like I'm home. And if I haven't sung in a while, I start to cry, because it's like meeting a long-lost friend. It's intrinsic to the definition of self, I think, for me. And at the risk of getting a retort from Javed Saab, it enlivens my spirit. So.
Actually, a human being wants to see order, harmony, pleasantness. And music offers all of it in the most sweetest form possible. It has harmony. and it makes sense. Sound starts making sense. So that's wonderful. As far as who are spiritual faith, who have spiritual faith, I mean, who are black and dark. So you are either spiritual or you have faith. If you have faith, that is good enough, I suppose, or bad enough, whatever. So they live long. Then I'm sure that in villages where people have total faith, they will be having longer lives than people who live in urban areas and have become cynics and have become suspicious of all these things. Countries and societies where there is less faith, people must be dying earlier. Countries where there is more faith and spirituality, people must be having long lives. But the fact is exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite.
That's not fair. I think, you can't take it in isolation.
Alright, so let's go to Kalahani, Bihar, where everybody is spiritual. Because they have nothing else except the spirit.
Yeah, but they don't have access to decent healthcare, so we can't talk about it.
You see, 200 years ago, an average age of India, all over the world, was 240 years, 200 years. But the fact is, with urbanization, with corporatization, with industrialization, the stress is increasing by many a fold. And the age is increasing. In spite of that, average age is increasing. See, spirituality is receding. Today, there are almost 60% people in USA who have given in the latest census that they don't have faith. So it means cynicism and disbelief in spirituality or any supreme power is definitely decreasing. Stress is increasing, but the age is increasing. The fact is that we have 100 times better medical help, and it is increasing by leaps and bounds. So of course, if stress reduces your age, of course, if you are tense, if you are worried, if you are paranoid, it will affect your health. The basic thing is the medicine. It goes to the body.
I would love to speak a little bit on the creativity part of it. How that makes you feel, sir, and how that you feel would enhance all our lives if we tapped into our creativity.
Actually, can I just add to that question, Javed Sabit? In the book, it talks about how creativity also brings you a sense of centeredness. But creative people also believe that creativity comes from pain. You need to suffer sometimes to be able to create something. And how do you think about that balance between both expression but also taking care of yourself?
It depends whether you are writing a poem or a novel about sad people, people who are depressed, people who are suffering, people who are repressed, then obviously you will go through the character's pain. If you are writing a poem about a famine or say about a war, about the destruction of a civilization, of course if you don't go through that pain, you will not be able to write properly. Your words will be dead. But at the same time, you may write a romantic poem, a romantic lyric, and then you will be in another mindset. You see, creativity is a strange process. When I deny any supernatural help available, it doesn't mean at all that I believe that it is a conscious mind that is doing everything. It's not true. You see, mind is not like a small store, that this is our mind. It is a mansion that has living room, that has bedroom, that has empty rooms, that has corridors, that has attics, that has basements, and many things, even our houses, small houses of Bombay. So often we discover things, oh God, it was here, I never knew that it is in the house. Exactly, it is the same thing is like the mind, brain. When you concentrate and you are totally lost in it, your conscious mind slowly takes the back step and slightly leaves the center of the stage. And that may call it pre-conscious, you may call it subconscious. There is so much stored there. So much. And you have heard, you have learned, you have seen, but you have forgotten. Then slowly it comes to help you. Slowly it knows that the conscious mind is at the moment humble. It has gone on the knees. It needs us. Then they come out. You know, like there is a no man's land between two countries. So there is a no man's land between conscious mind and subconscious mind and pre-conscious mind. Poetry is written there, creativity, all creativity, painting, art, singing, composing, all of it has happened. It happens on that no man's land. But the other side is also yours. No one can get the inspiration to write poetry in Chinese if he doesn't know Chinese. So it doesn't come from anywhere. It is there in you. Many times when I am writing, I feel surprised. When did I learn this word? When have I used it before? When I read it or heard it? You don't remember, but it was there. It was stored. But this process, because it is not in sharp focus, we start putting halo around it. And you know, from somewhere it came to me. Oh yeah. It has come from nowhere. It has come from your brain, from your mind.
Thank you, Javed Sahab. So the mind part of the book is to be read with a lot of focus. And since Madhu started us off, I have lots of questions, but I think I hear a lot of curiosity in the room. So maybe we open it up to the audience. Anyone would like to ask Sujata or Javed Sahab a question? Do we have a mic in the floor? Yeah, we do.
Hi. So the spiritual part that you were talking about, healing.
Is it for me or for Javed?
It is for you, Sujata, and Javed Sahab can comment, of course. So doesn't it create a placebo kind of an effect? The spiritual part where you have faith in whatever you are doing, whatever medications you are taking, doesn't it create that placebo effect, and that helps you in healing faster?
Yeah, so the placebo effect is definitely documented, right? 70% of people who take a sugar pill get well. Their mind tells the body this is a medicine, and the body heals itself, and it's like magic, and it works. So yeah, why not? We don't know, but why not? Because we don't know what creates the placebo effect, but it's definitely something that does happen. So could very well be related.
And maybe less toxic than those medicines that have been
Not toxic at all, right? Not toxic at all. Yeah.
Well, back to I'm very excited to read the book, and I think I just wanted to ask a question around your focus.
I think we often think about health in terms of quantity, length of how long you live. But even just reading this quote, you brought that important point of its quality and not quantity. So I would have, before this discussion, asked about some tips on how to build your spirit, but let me not use that word. But I'd love to hear, really just a few ideas on how you look at really building that quality of your life. There's not one size fits all. I think with the more medical side, you take medicine to lower blood sugar, but the mindfulness is very different. So I'd love to just hear your take on that.
No, so Roshi, for me, it's spending more time in nature, spending more time with my friends, reading what I enjoy, singing more, being self-compassionate, so being kind to myself, being mindful of that. I think that's what works for me.
Anyone?
What's your question?
Yes,
You don't do that. If you are interested, if you are interested in life, in things, in people, it happens to you. You see, there is no formula. You have to, if you want to be interested, be interested. And you will see things, observe them. एक बहुत अच्छा शेर है 300 साल पहले Mir was a poet, a great poet, who had written and translated for you. Sarsari tum jahan se guzre, varna harja jahan digar tha. That you went through life in a cursory manner. Otherwise, at every step there was a new word. So we don't observe. We observe. And we will only observe if we are interested. If you are interested, we will have a huge stroke.
Shrikant.
I think I'm close enough. I just thought if you all could speak a few words about mental health and use this as a platform in terms of your book that tell us how your thoughts on mental health being an important topic that we should be talking about and at least addressing. What are your thoughts about it?
So yeah, Madhu, I was just talking to my mother today. Every year we've seen in our social circle one child commit suicide in his or her teenage years for the last 4 years in Bangalore during this time, during the exam time. So it's definitely something that is becoming a source of concern amongst teenagers. It is definitely a source of concern amongst adults. And it's about really first recognizing that mental illness is like any other illness. There is help available. Just like you wouldn't expect somebody with a flu to go and work, somebody who's depressed isn't able to put in the same kind of hours and be themselves the way that you would expect them to. Just because they look well doesn't mean that they feel well. And there is help out there. Not the best help available yet in India for everybody, but I think if the demand were to increase, the supply would follow. Right? So yeah, for sure.
We have time for one more question, so Shrikant.
May I add something to it? You see, as a matter of fact, it is the report of, again, WHO. That because of malnutrition, almost every fourth child in India is to a certain extent mentally stunted because of malnutrition. Now, if we have, it doesn't mean that everybody who is getting 2 square meals is mentally healthy. So don't draw wrong conclusions. But it is perhaps a kind of a mirage, the mental health. I don't know what is mental health and who is the person whom you can call completely mentally healthy. It's not possible. If you have, mind is not totally in our control. Many times mind is controlling us. So we will have some problems, but hopefully they are benign, not malignant. So basically, I mean, as long as person thinks that life has good points and bad points, as long the person thinks that maybe I have one point of view, the other person has another point of view, maybe we can accept all kind of people, all kind of things, with perhaps sometimes with a pinch of salt, and want to live in harmony, want to contribute something in our immediate environment. Maybe your ambition is even bigger, then you are a normal person. And if you are consumed by self-pity and hate for others, then you are not a normal person.
Shrikant, you waited a long time, so yes.
In fact, I would like to add a little more about mindfulness. Mindfulness is actually wherever my body is, mind should be there. That is mindfulness.
True.
Otherwise, I am here, I may be thinking of my house.
Absolutely,
what
it's
is
about
there for
being the
eating.
here and now, yes.
Wherever bring my mind towards my body, whatever I am doing right now. What do you think yourself?
Somebody has said that in case of an accident, presence of mind is good, but the absence of body is better.
Also, as far as faith is concerned, Javed Sahab, we were talking about faith, you were talking about faith. I think we all have faith. Without faith, we cannot take this next step. Suppose I have a faith that I am going to fall, I will not take that step.
So why don't you step on a quicksand or in the water?
No.
Why don't you go off the boat and step on the ocean? If you have faith, no. You have experience. You know that if you will put the next step, the earth will not sink.
That's the faith.
And no, that's an experience. When you were a child, you were very scared. That is your experience. That's not your faith.
But that has come to me, no? So
Yes, obviously,
faith comes out of
it will come
experience.
to you. So, that's not faith.
We have time, one last question.
My, no, I can say love. I was actually interested in knowing about the spirit, so much of discussion about the spirit.
You have to read the book. Then
No,
you can
exactly. I will certainly read it. But I still thought that it becomes a very abstract concept and that's what I really wanted to know. Javed Sahab, I may agree with you about having spirit or whatever different story.
Provided?
No. So the issue is what he gave the example about poor people and the rich countries and all. So when all things are constant, that is how probably the research works. When all things being constant, if the spirit is a variable, then only we can say that it works. Maybe
that is sort of the point that I was making with the Sri Sathya Sai Institute, but
I think Sujata, you have to write a whole book on this now. Next book.
So I just wanted to, because I still feel a very abstract content to really, make it a bit objective and understand. So if you can just, define or say something what we mean by the spirit. Thank you.
So so if you're talking about spiritual health and really working on that, and talking about accessing, basically I think what you need to do is really go back and read the scriptures. That's what you really need to do, because there is no way your mind is ever going to understand it. Your mind can't understand it. This is our ego that thinks that we can understand everything. We can't. Just as Javed Sahab was talking about accessing your subconscious, this is something like that. This is like that. So there is tremendous power in that. There's tremendous power in that spiritual anchor, but finding it is actually more about selfless action, about doing things for others, about loving people, loving constantly, endlessly, selflessly. It's more about the doing part than it is about the thinking part. And that's what our scriptures tell us. So.
Well, with that, thank you all very much for being here and being part of this spirited discussion. We'd like to thank you once again, Javed Sahab. Thank you so much for being part of this. Thank you, Swati. And of course, a big hand for Sujata Kelkar Shetty. The books are available. If you haven't got one yet, then Sujata will be available to sign them for you. So please do that. And make sure to take one of the bookmarks, because those are special. They were made by Sujata's son Arav, especially for her. So make sure that you get one of the bookmarks. Well, thank you all very much for being here, making this launch a success, and here's wishing you all 99 not out. Sorry.